Today. We will be recording this meeting, and of course, we ask that everybody remain muted. There will be time for questions and answers. If you do have a question, we just ask that you raise your hand or put that question in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat for all of your questions. And again, we'd like to welcome you to the fundamentals of legislative visits and making the ask. We'll be joined this evening by myself. I'm Julie Boetger with the Ohio Poor People's Campaign, along with Larry Bresler from Organize Ohio. And we always like to start things out with a centering quote. And I'd like to begin this evening with a wonderful quote by John Lewis. "Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. Why? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet." And that, of course, is by the infamous John Lewis. And we begin tonight by discussing a little bit about the background of the bills that we are talking about, which is HB 109, HB 22, and SB 41. We'll start out this evening with HB 109, which is the, of course, anti-protest legislation. And HB 109 makes it a first-degree misdemeanor for 5 or more people to block a street, a sidewalk, or students doing a sit-in at a school. Organizations who provide active support or resources to a protest that results in loss of property or harm to a police officer will be liable for treble damages. This also creates the new offenses of riot assault and riot vandalism, which makes it between a 3rd and a 5th degree felony to engage in behavior of 5 or more people that results in physical harm to another person or property. So, first of all, I should ask, does anybody have any questions or comments on this? It's a pretty archaic bill. Larry, do you have anything to add to this?
Only that because of the action of many people who are on now, and others, the bill was much more draconian than it was previously. It had been a 2nd degree misdemeanor for up to 15 years in prison to block a street under this bill, or to do any kind of sit-in or something like that, as well as, and we've been able to bring it down somewhat. There is a danger they could kick it back up, and that's one is, and as well as with the other bills. But right now, we've been able to bring it down somewhat. We'd like to see it eliminated altogether. And that's, as we're talking later, we're going to be talking about the actions that you can be doing. But we're making an impact. We need to be doing more.
Yeah, I would just like to add that currently, this particular action is a 4th degree misdemeanor.
That's correct.
Which carries with it a 30-day jail sentence and $250 fine, and those are maximum penalties. But with a 1st degree misdemeanor, it goes up to 6 months in jail and $1,000 fine. I think that's correct.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Dave.
Which is better than a felony. I also want to add that 109 includes something that is incredibly dangerous for nonprofits and churches, in that they have a section in there on corrupt activity. And if nonprofits are found to be supportive of a protest that somebody, unbeknownst to anybody, engages in vandalism or some kind of violence and turns it into a riot, then that nonprofit or church that has supported or even advertised the public witness action can be held liable under the corrupt activity section, and the fines and such that are there, both civil or criminal, could bankrupt a congregation. So I worry about that.
We all worry about that. Anastasia, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do have a question about the active support, because again, this is vague. I mean, I guess active support could be construed as giving water to people on a hot day.
It could be.
That's my question.
It's pretty
Do we know
nebulous.
that?
Yeah, it's pretty vague. And that's the whole point of it, is that it can be defined in many ways. And that's part of the problem, is how is that interpreted? Who interprets it?
I'll give you an example of something that happened. That there's an individual, an organization that regularly provides sound system for these protests. Theoretically, under these circumstances, that organization could be liable for treble damages because they gave active support for that demonstration.
So we also, just to let you know, already have laws that cover things. So in a lot of these cases, these are repeat laws that already exist on the books, and there really is no need. Anyone else have anything to add to that, or have any questions about HB 109?
Representative Abrams tried to clarify that if your organization was not involved in planning a corrupt activity, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. I asked her, how would the police know, or how would anyone know what went on in a planning session unless surveillance or infiltration of some sort was involved? And if that's the case, it not only brings up our First Amendment concerns, but our Fourth Amendment concerns as well.
And
So,
Dave, what she said also was flat out inaccurate based on the way it's written. That may be the way she interprets it, but it's not the way it's written. And it could be, and so the language would need to be tightened to include that. But your point is well taken as well.
And what about an organization that has an event, such as a gathering at the State House, and people are protesting on certain bills and certain things, and somebody that's not even involved in the group, didn't even sign up for your group, happens to be in the crowd and decides to do some kind of vandalism to something? How can they decipher the fact that that wasn't with your organization? And how can you get a chance of your organization being held accountable for those actions?
And in fact, they would be held accountable for those actions. So as an example, and I'm from Cleveland, so I'm using Cleveland as an example. Back in May 30th, when the Black Lives Matter protests happened, Black Lives Matter held a protest that was peaceful. The first hour was peaceful. They intended to be peaceful, and then of course it got out of hand through no intention or effort by Black Lives Matter. Nevertheless, for the property harm that was done, for example, there was some that was done. There was done to police vehicle, et cetera, at the time. They could be under this legislation. Black Lives Matter could have been liable for treble damages.
Olga, please explain how did that happen similar in Youngstown? Give us your example, please.
In Youngstown, we had a Black Lives Matter rally, and it was like one of the last ones we had. It was last summer, and it was all peaceful and everything. Church organizations were involved and all that. And it was all real peaceful. Right when it was about to end, a group of people from Pittsburgh came, and they blocked the whole highway, 680. They even got on 680, which is a freeway, blocked 680, damaged a couple school buildings here, broke out windows in the school buildings, And our people in Youngstown got got accused of all the damage. And then another thing happened when Pence rally came here, when Pence came to visit for the police department. The group that we had the protest with, my group, had nobody involved. In fact, the other people were coming in and trying to get us up in the uproar and to fight with them. And then somebody just off the street, somebody called another person in a car a certain name because they had a Biden's. That girl wasn't even involved, called, threw something at her car from the other people. She got out, but it was our people that got blamed for starting a little ruckus.
Thank you for sharing that.
So let's move on to 22.
Yes. So HB 22 makes it a crime to divert or obstruct an officer's attention in a way that inhibits, deprives, or restricts the control of a detainee. Yelling at a police officer, getting too close to a police officer when making an arrest, or videotaping an arrest. It also makes throwing an object or substance in an officer's direction, including glitter and confetti. So this is a ridiculous bill, because what exactly is considered a diversion? That is so open-ended, and that can be judged in so many ways. And who is being left to make those decisions? Does anybody have anything to add to this one?
It's passed the House and is now going into the Senate. So it's and again, it was one of these bills that was originally, all these things were felonies. They've been moved down to misdemeanors. Doesn't mean it's acceptable. And as you said, Julie, that's ridiculous in terms of what that. And so if you were too close under this bill, if you were too close to people who were violating the law and you were in a demonstration, you could be arrested because you were obstructing a police officer's duties. That if you, under the George Floyd situation, if you were videotaping somebody making an arrest and you were diverting a police officer's attention, or you were yelling at a police officer because you didn't agree with the arrest, you could be arrested under this and charged with a first-degree misdemeanor.
They did, after we did our testimony at the House on House Bill 22, they did make an amendment saying that this in no way infringes on your right to video record what's going on. But it said nothing about whether, if you yell something or ask something or plead while you're video recording, whether that might not be a distraction.
Except they haven't changed the language to that regard in the bill. There's nothing that says anything about videotaping. There's nothing that I've seen that changes the language that still says that you couldn't arrest somebody who's videotaping.
Oh, then we need to get on their case, because they did have an amendment and they did send that out in written form. So
I'll take a look at it again, but I don't think that was, as I looked at it, I didn't see it, but I may have missed it, but I don't think so.
It's on the House website and not on the legislature website.
Yes, I understand. Okay.
Okay.
So I just want to make a comment that you noticed that all these bills came up. Somebody had mentioned George Floyd. All these bills have come up, I believe, as a result of the George Floyd incident. Because if we didn't have that videotape and we didn't have all those people, we certainly wouldn't have had the outcome that we did, and justice would not have been served. So I personally believe that all these bills came out as a result of George Floyd. And a lot of the protest bills that have come out, anti-protest, are as a result of some of the protests in the environmental issues. For example, Line 3, what's currently going on with Line 3 and protesting against critical infrastructure. That bill passed. What is that? SB 33, I believe, is what it is. And we cannot protest now. It makes it a crime to protest an infrastructure. So these are all as a result of things that have occurred. We have had no problems with them in our own state necessarily. These are just really unnecessary bills. So if
I would,
yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead.
No, I was just going to say that one of the issues with all of these bills is the vague and overbroad language.
Yes.
And because of that, it actually enhances the police officer's discretionary powers. So, you know, an officer can, because of the overbroad and vague language, can say, hey, you violated, I'm going to arrest you, and you get arrested and charged. And if the prosecutor goes along with it, then you have to defend yourself in a court of law, which even if you're innocent and found not guilty, you have been hassled by all of this, which is one of the main outcomes of all of this, is that it's providing and presenting a chilling effect on the whole idea of protesting, which I think, even though they claim that it's not their intent, that is exactly the intent or the unintended consequence.
It emboldens the powers that be to make whatever decision they choose to make at the time.
Okay.
Anybody else have any input?
Yeah, this is Olga again.
Yes.
Yeah, it might not, I've been arrested a couple times for videotaping that protest. For mostly, when both of them were in DC for the medical, the Affordable Care Act hearings.
What were you charged with?
Misdemeanors, and I got my bail paid to get out.
Wow.
It's a whole nother world in Washington. It is in Ohio. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll move on to SB 41. SB 41 makes it a felony for vandalism of public property, including defacing public property using chalk or erasable magic markers. New anti-protest bills may be introduced along with making the current bills worse. So we know that there's a whole agenda that seems to be in play here, and that at any time we can have new bills brought up. And we also know that these bills can lay and have nothing be brought up, and then they can be brought up at the end of the session. And that's what we're all hoping does not happen, because we don't want any more bills and we don't want to make the current ones worse.
Right.
So does anybody have any input on SB 41, how it makes it a felony for vandalism of public property, including defacing public property? I know that in the past, there have been a lot of organizations that have used sidewalk chalk or that have used glitter or anything like that. Joan, do you have any input on this?
No, I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. And of course, things more seriously. And it also, of course, includes in that, you know, government buildings, statues, all kinds of things like that. And it was obviously written to make sure that nobody pulled down a Columbus statue or defaced a statue that was somehow glorifying Ohio's, some of the Ohioans who were in the Confederacy, because there are some plaques like that around town.
So move on now to just talking about kind of the in-person meetings what we're going to send to all of you to hear, if you don't have it already, the links for our September 22nd rally lobby day. But we're going to be talking about, and the lobbying is we're going to be having in-person meetings either through Zoom or in person there. But this is what I'm going to be talking about is in-person meetings under any kind of circumstances, and they can be so effective. We want to talk, but there's ways you can do it to make it the most effective possible. So you can meet with a legislator by and large in two ways. One is in Columbus in their office, and the other's in their home district. And I think either makes good sense. If you can't meet with the legislator, and that's going to happen with us in some cases, on the 22nd, we're going to be meeting with their staff, and in many cases, the staff know more than the legislator about the issues that we're talking about. And under any circumstances, it can be very effective. They can be effective, not quite as effective as meeting with the legislator, but effective. And when you're trying to do it, you call the legislator's office to set up an appointment. You go to ohio.gov, and you'll see, and you can look up the legislator, or you can even Google the legislator. You'll find the number in there, and you'll reach one of the staff people who hopefully, or leave a message for one of the staff people, and then you go ahead and try to set the meeting accordingly.
Now, if you're going to be involved in the State House Stop that we're hosting on the 22nd of September, you just sign up and we will call the legislators and arrange that meeting for you. So this time around for State House Stop, you don't necessarily have to worry about calling and setting up the appointment with the legislator, because we'll be doing that. But in the future, of course, it's always important to try to get a meeting with your legislator on important issues, because that's really the best way for them to hear you, is to meet in person with them. Yes.
And from again, I'm going to be talking about mostly here from a general perspective, not just from the September 22nd event. And as you're looking to meet with the legislators, you're planning to meet with the legislators, when you're doing it, there's some things you kind of do in kind of preparation for your meetings. One thing is, you want to know how the legislator has approached the subject matter, or similar subject matters in the past. Have they been supportive of your position? Have they been against your position? Why have they been against your position? Doing some research in that regards. Secondly, you want to know what the legislators' priorities are. If you're not sure, you can go visit the legislators' page on the Ohio House or Senate website and see what they talk about in their press releases. So I'll give you an example. A group of us were meeting with a legislator about the state budget, and particularly around human services priorities. And it was a Republican legislator. And this particular Republican legislator didn't care a lot about human services, didn't at least talk a lot about human services, but boy, was he into public education. And so, we researched and found that he cared so much about public education. So we geared everything that we talked about him and kind of related to public education, why it was important, and it was effective. And so doing that research can be effective. Likewise, there's a legislator that a Senate leader at one time that we knew that had a developmentally disabled child, and he was very much gung-ho in terms of funding for that area. So as we talked about other kind of things, we related to that area. So knowing the background can be very effective and important. Secondly, you can go individually and say you represent a group, but it's always more effective to go as a small group. I personally think the perfect number is 4 or 5 people, although it can be more than that, it can be less than that. But to me, that tends to be the kind of the ideal number, 4, 5, or 6. And before you go in, plan with your group. Sit down with whatever group you are, figure out what role you're going to have, decide how you're going to organize it, decide how you're going to be going forward, and so that everybody has a role, but you're not stepping over each other and you have it well organized. Again, before you go in, know the legislation. Be prepared for questions that are going to be asked. Be prepared for pushback that's going to be asked, and have responses ready so that you know what they're going to be. So never be caught flat-footed. Never be caught in a position where a legislator says, well, I'm against it for this reason, you can't respond back. Or I've got a question for you, you have no idea, and you haven't read the legislation carefully enough to be able to respond to it. My experience has been, is you can never, ever underestimate what a legislator does not know. My experience has been that by and large, legislators have very little knowledge of the things that we're going to talk to them about. And so you can't assume they know anything. So you may get some very basic questions, or when you meet with them, you're going to need to explain things to them, unless you know that they're very conversant. So generally you want to set out the legislation, focusing, they say describe it for those that may not know it, and why you support it and oppose it. Again, you want to connect it to the area of interest based on your knowledge. And it's always good to have, whether it's you or it's one of the other members of your group, to have a personal story about how the law is currently affecting you, or how it's not affecting you, or how it could affect you, and be able to tell that story. Because our experience has been that legislators respond more to things that from personal experience, your personal experience, than they do to statistics and numbers. Not to say you can't use statistics and numbers, but they'll respond more to your personal stories. Make sure you provide opportunities for comments and questions from your legislator, and then end with an ask of support for your position, whatever it is, opposing the legislation, in favor of the legislation, whatever you're asking of the legislator. When you have the in-person meetings, you generally can expect 15 to 20 minutes of the legislator's time. When you set up a time, generally it's 15 to 20 minutes. That's not always the case. Sometimes they may only give you 5 minutes or so, but by and large you get 15 to 20 minutes. I would prepare for the 15 to 20 minutes, but also prepare for the 5 to 10 in case he's not. So you want to say all the important stuff right up front. The stuff that you think is the biggest priority. You want to make a specific actionable request. We need your support to vote against HB 22 or HB 109 or whatever you're talking about. Can we have your support? I always, without exception, if I'm meeting with a legislator in their office, whether it's in Columbus or it's in their community, I always, without exception, leave not only my contact information or our contact information, but a pack of written information for them to review. So I think that so that they can review it afterwards. They're going to, particularly if you're meeting with them in Columbus, they're going to be seeing a whole lot of people that day from Columbus, and they're going to forget about you. But if you can leave them a packet of information, whether it's with them or the legislative aid, that can work very much in your favor. Always, always, always do that. After you've met with them, send an email or letter back, thanking them for the visit, restating your position. If they made a commitment to you that I will support, I will oppose, I will vote against, be sure to restate it. And if they haven't, again, say we urge you to support this. We think it's in your interest, whatever. But always send a follow-up. Always send a follow-up email. Again, going back to what I said, they meet with a lot of people. It reminds them of your particular meeting. Also, as there's more information, if there's more information that comes about, send that to the legislator as well. If it's been amended, that we're say that it's been amended, but we're still opposed to it for these reasons. If it's been amended, you support the new version. Send them an email saying that we now support it. Keep the legislator up to date. They're not going to keep up to date unless it's something they're active with.
And if I might state something else, if they ask questions that you might not necessarily have the information in front of you, or it's information that needs to be sent, also send that in the follow-up email to answer any questions that they might have had.
Yes,
too.
Good point. And you didn't have the information. Even if you did, sending it in writing afterwards makes good sense. That's a very good point, Julie. Again, you could either do it in Columbus or in district. My personal preference, is doing this in district meetings. Generally, you can do them longer because their schedule isn't always as tight. They can be a little less formal, which I think kind of works to your advantage. And you can get more people involved from the community. When you're meeting with legislators, it's the best thing to happen is to have constituents there. So so if you're doing it in the community, then that gives you a greater opportunity to bring people, their own constituents there, because they respond much more to constituents than they do to people out of that are not going to be electing them. So members often announce their office hours on their Facebook pages, for example. So go to those pages, look them up, and you'll be able to find some of that. If not, you can always call the legislative aid and ask whether they're doing it, whether they're having it, but find out when they're meeting the community and try to set up accordingly. And if you can't do something face to face, try to do a Zoom call. Zoom calls can be just as good nowadays. Legislators are doing Zoom calls all the time, and they can be just as effective.
As a matter of fact, we had a very successful Zoom call with Senator Brown, Sherrod Brown, his director. So they're always open to meet, very receptive, very great call through Zoom. I would say it was successful, wouldn't you, Larry?
Yes, yes. And so generally when we're doing Zoom meetings, you want to, again, have it well organized like you did with the in-person. In some ways, even more important to do that with determining who the order of speakers are going to be. If there's a large number of people in the meeting, have all the people muted who are not speaking. Nothing is worse than speaking over somebody or speaking over noise that's there when you're trying to keep the legislators' attention. So obviously, if not everybody's muted, mute them if there's noise in the background. Use share screen to share important information. Although I tend to believe that we should limit the use of share screen if we're not sharing information, because I think it's good to see the people's face. I think the legislator is good for them to see your face, and so when you have a document up, it's much tougher for that to happen. Again, send the email to the legislator afterwards, reiterating the points and everything we talked about earlier. As we're communicating with legislators, there's some, and particularly if we're communicating with legislators that are not in our positions, generally Republicans. I think the first question we want to be asking ourselves is, how do we get legislators to think about our issue? So they may not care about human services. They may not care about health care. They may not care about anti-protest bills, because that's not something that they're going to be dealing with. So we need to think about how we get them to think about our issues in a way that they want to solve it through our aims, to either oppose legislation, to support maybe healthcare kind of big, healthcare, childcare, whatever it is, that we would need to think about how we can get them to solve the issues or be supportive in the way that we want to do it. And part of the way is doing that is through the use of frames. Frames are the mental structure of beliefs and values and knowledge that we see the world. So we also see things by frames, you know, that when you think of people getting arrested for peaceful protest, an immediate frame comes to your mind. That may be a much different frame than the legislator has. And ultimately, we want to get legislators to reframe. In other words, to change when they have certain beliefs or values or knowledge. We want to challenge those to see the frames that they have when those things are to our way to see the world. So some things that need to be thought and kept in mind. One, people are not blank slates. When we go and see a legislator, we're not seeing a legislator that doesn't have an opinion on the issues, even if they don't know about the issues. They have their own biases, they have their own thoughts, and we need to recognize those. Secondly, the communication is interactive. There's a two-way street. We can't be doing all the talking. It's got to be something that happens where we have a meeting of communication. Again, the currency of communication is frames. If we're trying to get people to change their mind And if we're not effective with what we're saying, then the legislator is going to fall back under their biases they had when we walked in. But on the other hand, if our communication is effective, and if we've been able to say some good things that make them think, then we have the potential of them seeing the issue, whether it's anti-protest bills or whatever, from a completely different frame. That's part of the reason why stories can be so effective, because that gives them an opportunity to see something from a completely different frame that they hadn't thought about before. So when we're appealing to a legislator, we may be going to see them around a specific issue. It could be welfare reform, it could be the Affordable Care Act, it could be the anti-protest legislation, and we can. But if we deal with it just from that level, it's going to be a hard trudge to get somebody who's opposed to it to see it our way. And so the way that we want to do that is appealing to kind of a level one ideas, level one issues where we can all agree. So everyone agrees about the idea that we should have freedom to do what we want to do. That we have the United States is based on basic freedoms. We have a belief in basic justice. Everybody has a belief in justice. May not be from the same perspective, but we all have a belief in justice. So if we're talking about if we're talking about the anti-protest bills, I don't think we don't want to necessarily delve it right from the perspective of that arresting people for doing civil disobedience is bad, because then it goes back to people's the frames they have. But if we go from the perspective, we all agree in justice for all and equal justice for all. We all agree that everybody should have a certain kinds of freedom. And if we're taking that away by doing peaceful demonstrations where we don't necessarily trying to break the law, that all of a sudden gets something that everybody can agree with, and then we can deal with the details of the legislation itself. And so we can start from the kind of level one levels of understanding, levels that everybody agrees to, or it can be level two. Then all of a sudden it gives us a perspective that we're talking from the same perspective, and then we can bridge from that into the other areas.
It really is kind of like an art, isn't it, Larry?
An art?
An art. It's an
Not
art.
necessarily. I don't think it's terribly difficult. I mean, it's not. Art would suggest that it takes a lot to understand it. I think it's something that we can all do very easily.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So framing your mission, so you want to use the values, as I've just talked about, to set up what's at stake and why it matters. So if we pass these anti-protest bills, it's going to mean whether you're from the right or your left, that we're not going to have equal justice in this country. And we all agree on equal justice. We all agree that we should have the freedom to do things within a certain realm, and should people be put in prison if there's small violations, or if there's or something to that effect. And so use the values to get people to care about our issues. Don't merely name drop a value, talk about it in detail. So don't say in the name of justice, we want you to oppose the anti-protest bills. Talk about why it's important, why it's important collectively, societally, not just appealing to the individuals. And you want to use your values in reasonable, explanatory tones. You don't want to be preachy and moralistic about it. That's going to turn people off. You don't want to sound sanctimonious. You want to do it in a way that's conversational and friendly, and be very careful as you're thinking about not to be preachy. I said that the stories are important, they are, but you can use numbers, and numbers can be effective, but use them sparingly. I wouldn't fill a talk when you're speaking with somebody about numbers and statistics. I would use some key ones and maybe emphasize those, and maybe use it to establish the size of the problem. I'm not sure that there's a lot of numbers we want to use in terms of the anti-protest bills, but there certainly is, if we're talking about things like human service issues or trying to get things passed that affects, if we're talking about, I think even then I'm thinking of a way you could use numbers effectively. One way in terms of the anti-protest bills is these things passed, we're going to be locking up a whole lot more people in a state where we are already spending X millions of dollars on prisons in the state, and which is keeping us from spending on all kinds of other things that are more important. So you can use numbers strategically, just don't overwhelm people with them. Again, you want to use an effective tone. Don't come across as partisan when you're talking to somebody. Don't argue with somebody. Establish a reasonable tone, kind of a can-do. We can do this together, can't we? I'm talking about with the legislator. Do we all agree on this? Let's talk about how we can do this together using that kind of level one, those level one values. Not we really need, not pushing in a way which is going to immediately get the defenses up of the legislator. Again, we want to appeal to values. And finally, it's kind of the last thing. Best practices when you're talking to a legislator. Don't insult the legislators. Even if they seem off base, they're trying to serve us. At least they think they're trying to serve us. So even if they're incredibly obnoxious, and many of them will be, even if you don't win them on this side, you might win them on something else. So don't insult them. Don't demean their questions. Don't say that was a stupid question, even if you know it was outrageously stupid. Take it, respond to it with dignity, respond to it, and generally don't go off topic when you're meeting with legislators. But I say that with a caveat. I found with some legislators that just having, even at the beginning, is kind of an icebreaker, having a friendly conversation, talking about their children. They may have things in the back with their children playing sports, highlighting and talking. It's such things in a nice tone, and I think it's a nice way to start out. And maybe you might want to go off topic if you're with the children, not using them as but something that kind of keeps things friendly and courteous in all of this. I think that can frequently work. Finally, don't assume a legislator opposes or supports your view. Just because they're Republican doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be against the anti-protest bills. And in fact, we've seen some Republicans that have been very much on our side, or at least up to this point, at least vocally, and ones that are certainly swayable. So don't assume that's the case. So in a nutshell, those are kind of the ins and outs that I see that are important in terms of in-person meetings. And I think for Julie and I, if you have any questions or comments at this point.
There is a question so far in the chat by Anastasia. She said, has any polling been done about how many Ohioans oppose these bills?
No, at least not to the best of my knowledge. And part of that is
no,
that it's expensive to do polling, at least from our perspective. And nobody else is going to do polling, or if it is, they're not letting us know what the results are.
Right. And I think it was an important point too. Anastasia also brought up the fact when bringing up the right of assembly in terms of freedom, should we say something about the freedom to wear a face mask or not, or is that too snarky? And Joan had commented back, don't get sidetracked into masks. I think it is important to kind of keep the focus on the one issue, maybe talk lightly about those other issues, crack a joke, but basically stick to the focus topic.
Well, I wouldn't talk about masks at all. I would stay as far away from that as I possibly could.
Schedule another meeting for that one, a separate meeting altogether, because that's a whole separate issue, So did anybody else have any questions or comments to make?
Yeah, I think Larry painted the best approach to take, and it reminded me of what my mother always said to me: you can get a lot further with honey than you can with vinegar.
We may detest some of these legislators, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be opposed to everything that we say. And I think that just because we may hate them on one issue doesn't mean we can't come back to them for another.
Catherine has a question.
Yes.
Hey, for the Stomp the State House on the 22nd, will we have a way to access, at least electronically, some of these materials so we can do a little study of those beforehand?
Well, everybody on this call is going to get this. Is going to get the is going to get this PowerPoint. But besides that, in terms of the materials of what it's all about, that's a good. Are we going to be able to send that out to everybody, Joan?
We're going to be sending out for everybody that registers for State House Stomp. We're going to be sending information in advance that will show you some talking points and other things that people have said about the bills that we're dealing with. We will also have packets of information for you, and which are more extensive, and then packets for the legislators, which you will leave with them. We're going to, let's see here. We will also have thank you notes at the headquarters in the Galbraith Pavilion, so that as soon as you're through, you can go and write a little thank you note. I mean, by hand, for heaven's sakes, really important. That's really cool. And then take it to the office in the State House for mailing, or somebody else can take it over there for you. So we're going to have that.
Isn't Reverend Terry doing a training beforehand too? A small.
Yes.
Yeah.
At 9:30, and right now I'm trying to get David Leland to come and talk to us at 9:30 or 9:45.
So
And
that's a
Dave-
brief training beforehand that they'll kind of guide you and tell you what to do, and yes, Joe.
And David Leland is the representative from District 22 who is sitting on the committee for criminal justice, and has been incredibly helpful with information and details and all of this stuff that we're using in this work against these bills.
He's been wonderful.
Did that help?
Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Daryl Kick is not, I mean, I think he backed some of these bills or co-sponsored some of them, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure how even to approach these issues that he'll even pay attention. I mean, any help? Because he's not, I don't know, he just seems not to be at all interested about an opposite point of view.
Again, I don't know the legislator personally. I don't know. It seems to me, if it's a co-sponsor, my approach would be, if I wanted to meet with them, I would look at ways with the legislator, talk about some of the co-sponsors, for example, 22, either stopped as co-sponsors or took their position, muted their positions considerably. And I think there's possibilities of moving legislators. In fact, there's more than possibilities. It's, we've been able to do it. And so my perspective, you know your legislator, you know the legislator better than I do. I think that looking at ways that you might appeal to, maybe not for the whole legislation, maybe for a piece of it in terms of doing things, whatever will work. Not to say you can't be that, or focusing on one area, and maybe say, well, I mean, I think it's an achievement, even if a legislator says, you've made a good point about that particular thing, and I may support the legislation, but I think you made a good point, and I'm gonna look to take that section out. as an example.
And, you know, I also think that maybe not doing it with yourself, Anastasia, just asking somebody else to maybe schedule a Zoom call with you so that you feel like you have support with you, and plan it out and, you know, go for the ask. That's the only way. Tell a personal story and go for it. I mean, that's the only way that they'll hear any kind of other version or hear any kind of other input, is if we kind of bite the bullet, fight those demons, and bring a support group. And I'd be happy to be on a call with you anytime you needed support or wanted anybody with you.
Now, this
Does
is
anyone,
Olga.
will they share your contact information with me, Julie?
Yes, that will be in the slides tomorrow, and I can put it right now in the chat. Be glad to.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's on the PowerPoint that you'll be receiving.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
Olga. Another little suggestion is, if they're really opposed to it, try to turn the situation, if they're gonna do the same thing or something they believe in. I actually got one representative years ago that's strictly against HIV help, you know, the Wrong White Care Act and everything. And I turned the criminalization law right on him. Like, if I was meeting him if we were talking at a restaurant or something, and 3 years later, he seen in the paper I was HIV positive, and he touched me on my knee and I didn't touch him on his knee, that he could prosecute me and put me in jail for 20 years. And I didn't even do the touching. And now he's a big supporter of us. So just
Yeah,
like try to
and
find it a way that, if he, turn the
yes,
situation around, on how would he act in that situation.
and a little bit of research on what they do
Yeah.
believe in, like Larry had mentioned, and kind of going at it through that angle, and maybe directing it in, in terms, in directing it back to what they do favor, and trying different tactics if they're against hearing it, opposition. I have that same issue where I live as well. I have a bunch of commissioners who don't want to hear any opposition to anything, any one of their plans. So it's very, you go in with positive. We want to keep it always positive, because we want to work with these legislators again in the future. We can always ask for amendments. We can always do things, but we want to keep it positive, and we really want to just keep forging forward, trying to build and establish a relationship either with the legislator or perhaps with their aide, because that can be effective as well.
Anything else? We're coming to close. We're coming close now to we're supposed to be an hour from 7 to 8. We're approaching 8 now. Anything else anybody wants to bring up? Great. Well, thank you all. We look forward to seeing you all on September 22nd. And appreciate you all being here tonight.